He was the sharpest strategic mind of his generation. He could read a trap before it closed, name a lie before it formed, and dismantle a system with one sentence. Yet the mistake that killed him sat inside his own inner circle the whole time. In the next few minutes, this video dissects the exact tactical error Malcolm X made when he assumed the people closest to him carried his same discipline. It will show you why that blind spot is shaping how you misjudge someone in your life right now. This is the blind spot. Not weakness, not fear, not a failure of intelligence. A brilliant man, surrounded by faces he trusted, standing in a room with no real protection because he believed conviction alone was armor enough. It was not. Picture him in early 1965, weeks from death, pacing a hotel room, phone line cut, family threatened, still refusing full-time security. A man who diagnosed every trap set for Black America somehow could not see the one closing around himself. He built his entire life on unflinching truth. He called out the government, the press, the false prophets of gradual freedom, and he did it without flinching once. That fearlessness made him a legend. It also made him predictable to the people planning his death. This is not a eulogy. This is an autopsy of judgment, because the very trait that made Malcolm X unbreakable in public was the identical trait that left him exposed in private. High conviction without verified loyalty is not strength. It is an open door. Somewhere in your life right now, you are trusting someone because they share your goal, your hustle, your cause, and you have quietly assumed that shared ambition means shared integrity. Malcolm made that same assumption. It cost him everything. So this is not just history. This is a diagnostic. By the end, you will understand the mechanism that isolated him, the 3 moves he made too late to survive it, and the framework you can use today so his mistake does not become yours. Malcolm X did not fall for lies. He fell for alignment. He believed that because a man stood beside him at a rally, bled for the same cause, quoted the same scripture of liberation, that man operated under the same moral law Malcolm lived by. This is the mechanism. Call it the illusion of shared alignment. It is the belief that a shared enemy automatically produces a shared conscience. It does not, cause binds people to a fight. It does not bind them to your discipline. His enemies understood this before he did. They did not need to out-argue him. Nobody out-argued Malcolm X. Instead, they studied him. They mapped his schedule, his temper, his loyalty to former brothers, and they waited for his own transparency to become the weapon. Picture federal agents in a windowless office in 1964, folders spread across a metal desk, photographs of Malcolm entering and exiting the same Harlem restaurant on the same nights, building a pattern from a man who never once tried to hide. That is the cruelty of it. His honesty, the very thing his followers loved him for, became a roadmap. A man who lies is unpredictable. A man who tells the truth every single time can be timed, tracked, and positioned. In March 1964, he broke from the Nation of Islam. He did it publicly, on principle, refusing to stay silent about corruption he had witnessed inside the organization that raised him. It was the most honest decision of his life. It was also the most exposed. The nation had given him something he underestimated until it vanished. Not just a pulpit, a perimeter. Trained men around him at every appearance, a financial structure, an internal intelligence network watching his back. The moment he walked away from the organization, he walked away from its armor too. He kept the conviction. He lost the infrastructure. He did not replace it fast enough, assuming his new allies would simply absorb the role the old ones had played. This is the anatomy of the failure, not naivety about power. He understood power better than almost anyone alive. His failure was narrower and far more human. He mistook people who admired his courage for people who would die to protect it. Ask yourself honestly, how many people in your circle would sacrifice comfort for you the way you would sacrifice comfort for them? Malcolm never ran that audit on the men nearest him. By the time he needed the answer, it was too late to ask. He received threats almost daily by early 1965. His home in Queens was firebombed while his wife and daughter slept inside. He walked through the wreckage the next morning, calm, already rebuilding his next speech, instead of rebuilding his protection. That single image says everything about the blind spot. A man capable of diagnosing an entire nation's psychological warfare could could not turn that same diagnostic instrument on the 4 or 5 people standing closest to him in any given room. His enemies weaponized his own principles against him. He believed in open dialogue, so they infiltrated his meetings. He believed in second chances for the fallen, so they placed the fallen back inside his trusted circle. Every virtue became an entry point. This is not a story about a naive man. It is a story about a brilliant man whose greatest strength had a shadow side nobody warned him about. Absolute conviction convinces you everyone around you sees the mission as clearly as you do. Rarely true. And here is the part that should unsettle you. This mechanism is not unique to 1965. It runs in your career and friendships right now. Every time you extend your own standard of loyalty onto someone who never agreed to carry it. Before the next act of this story, understand what you are actually building by staying here. This channel exists to hand you the exact psychological architecture behind history's sharpest minds, the wins and the fatal blind spots both. So you stop repeating the second kind. If Malcolm's diagnosis of his own downfall means something to you, subscribing is not a small gesture. It is you telling this channel to keep excavating the patterns that get brilliant people killed, professionally, financially, personally, so you can spot yours before it closes in. Hit subscribe now, because what comes next is the part of this story most people never get taught. The specific moves Malcolm made in his final year to try to survive his own blind spot, and exactly where those moves still fell short. Here is where the story turns. Because Malcolm X did notice. Slowly, in fragments, through 1964, the sharpest strategist of his era began sensing the trap closing around him, and tried, in real time, to build his way out of it. Picture him in Cairo in the summer of 1964, standing before the Organization of African Unity, dressed sharp, notebook in hand, no longer speaking only for Harlem, now addressing an entire continent of newly independent nations about a shared liberation struggle. This was the first move of his recovery. Step 1. Expand the mission beyond one vulnerable organization. He founded the Organization of Afro-American Unity, a structure built on his own philosophy instead of borrowed from a religious body that had already betrayed him. It was his most sophisticated strategic move yet. Global alliances, secular framing, a platform designed to outlive any single threat against him. For the first time, Malcolm was not just preaching liberation, he was architecting an institution meant to protect him. Step 2 came quietly. He began writing. Long nights with Alex Haley, dictating the raw material of what would become his autobiography. A decision that reads, in hindsight, like a man making sure the truth would survive, even if he did not. Picture him backstage at the Audubon Ballroom weeks before his death, aides urging him to increase security after the firebombing, and Malcolm waving off the suggestion with the same phrase he had used his entire public life. The truth protects itself. That sentence had carried him through prison, through the nation, through 100 death threats. It was also, tragically, incomplete. The truth protects the message. It does not protect the man delivering it. He had discovered the difference too late to fully correct it. Step 4, the final and most human one, was reconciliation. He reached out to former rivals, softened old feuds, tried to widen his circle of protection by widening his circle of trust, still operating on the belief that shared struggle could still produce shared loyalty. This is the tragedy inside the recovery. Every step he took to rebuild was strategically sound. Expand the platform, preserve the message, accept protection, widen alliances. The architecture was correct. The execution simply started too late for the timeline his enemies were already running. Translate this into your own life. A blind spot rarely announces itself as stupidity. It announces itself as a delay. You see the risk, you even name it, and then you keep operating at the old pace, because changing pace feels like admitting fear. Malcolm's scars became the blueprint for anyone paying close enough attention. The lesson was never stop trusting people. The lesson was stop assuming trust and verification are the same act. He earned that wisdom too close to the end to fully use it. Here is the modern framework hiding inside his final year. High personal standards are not the flaw. Projecting those standards onto people who never agreed to meet them, that is the flaw. Discipline is not contagious. It has to be confirmed, not assumed. Run this exercise this week. List the 5 people closest to your biggest goal right now. Ask honestly, for each one, whether their commitment matches yours or whether you have simply been assuming it does because they're standing near the mission. This is not cynicism. Malcolm never became cynical. Not once, not even at the end. This is precision. You can love people fully and still refuse to hand them unverified access to your exposure, your finances, your timeline, your location, your plans. Conviction tells you what you are willing to sacrifice. Situational awareness tells you who around you is actually watching your back while you sacrifice it. Malcolm mastered the first with total clarity. He mastered the second only in the final months of his life. By January 1965, the threats had stopped feeling abstract. Phone calls at odd hours, cars idling too long outside his home. Malcolm told close friends he did not expect to live to see 40. He said it calmly, almost as fact. That calm is the final piece of the anatomy, not denial, recognition without full correction. He saw the blind spot clearly by the end. He simply ran out of runway to close the gap between seeing a danger and structurally neutralizing it. This is the hardest truth this channel will ask you to sit with. Sometimes clarity arrives on time to name a threat, yet too late to survive it. That is not a reason to avoid clarity. It is reason to act on it faster. February 21st, 1965. The Audubon Ballroom, Manhattan. Roughly 400 people gathered to hear him speak. Malcolm had specifically requested his usual security detail be reduced that afternoon. The room he stood in was, by his own instruction, exposed. Picture the stage. A wooden podium. Rows of folding chairs. Malcolm stepping forward to address the crowd, opening with the traditional greeting of peace, unaware that the very words of welcome were the signal for a disturbance planted near the front rows. In the confusion of raised voices near the back, the men closest to the stage moved. Malcolm X was struck at close range, in front of his wife and young daughters, inside a room he had entered, believing his message alone would shield him. This is the literal, physical shape of the blind spot, not a metaphor anymore. An exposed room, a reduced detail, a crowd he trusted because they claimed to share his cause. The architecture he built too late simply was not finished in time to hold. Here's what makes this story unbearable and instructive at once. The men who exploited that exposure did not need to defeat his ideas. His ideas were airtight. They only needed to defeat his proximity to protection. That is a different kind of failure. So when you hear that Malcolm X made a fatal mistake, understand what it actually was. It was never a flaw in his thinking. It was a delay in matching external vigilance to internal conviction. The idea was never the weak point. The perimeter was. This is the framework worth carrying out of this entire story. Conviction without institutional armor is not bravery. It is exposure wearing the costume of bravery. Real strength pairs unshakable belief with a structure disciplined enough to survive an attack on the person holding it. Ask yourself, right now, honestly, where in your life your conviction has outpaced your protection? Your business without contracts, your finances without oversight, your trust in a partner you have never actually tested under pressure. Name it before circumstance names it for you. High personal standards are not optional if you want to build anything that lasts. But standards alone will not protect you from people operating on lower ones. You need both, the fire of Malcolm's conviction and the cold vigilance he found in his final year. This is the framework. Verify before you extend access. Build structure before you need it, not while already under threat. Widen your circle slowly and audit it constantly, because shared struggle is never proof of shared discipline, no matter how loudly it feels like proof. Malcolm X did not die because he was wrong. He died because brilliance had convinced him, understandably, that everyone standing close enough to hear his truth had also earned the right to stand close enough to guard it. That single assumption is the entire tragedy. His autobiography survived him. His organization's ideas outlived the bullets. His words are still quoted in classrooms and protests decades later. Proof that the message he protected through Alex Haley's tape recorder did exactly what he built it to do. It survived. But the man did not have to be the price of that survival. That is the line worth sitting with. Not every sacrifice that looks noble in hindsight was necessary. Sometimes it was simply a blind spot that ran out of time to correct itself. This is why the story matters now, not as history, but as a mirror. Somewhere in your life today, your own conviction is outrunning your own protection. And the gap between those two things is exactly where every avoidable collapse begins. Do not let admiration for his fearlessness convince you that vigilance is weakness. Malcolm's greatest regret, spoken quietly to those near him at the end, was not his boldness. It was waiting too long to treat his safety with the discipline he gave his message. So close this blind spot before life forces the lesson on you the way it forced it on him. Audit your circle. Verify the loyalty you have been assuming. Build the structure before the threat arrives, because clarity that comes too late still costs everything. If this story changed how you see your own exposure, subscribing is how you tell this channel to keep handing you these frameworks before your own blind spot becomes the headline. Not as a favor to this channel, as a discipline you owe yourself. Malcolm X gave everything to a truth he refused to soften. Let his final, unfinished lesson be one thing you do not learn the hard way. See clearly. Protect deliberately. Let conviction and vigilance finally stand guard together the way he never got to build. Subscribe now and carry this forward, not as a memorial to what was lost, but as the armor he was still building when time ran out. His truth survived him. Let his blind spot be the reason yours never cost you what it cost him.